As you were stating.
It's like, you got way down.
Better, and how you can be able to use that in the work you do and in your home life as well, because we all experience grief and loss. It's part of all of our lives. I thought that I would just start today with a song that you all might know, at least those of us that are a certain age know. Back in the 1950s, Pete Seeger wrote the song Turn, 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 and it was made popular by the Byrds in '65. I know some of you weren't even born then, but some of the rest of us who are older adults remember this. What a lot of people don't know about this song is that it was actually, the words of the song are from the Old Testament, Ecclesiastes 3, and it goes like this. To everything, there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to reap, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to laugh, a time to weep, a time to build up, a time to break down, a time to dance, a time to mourn, a time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones together, a time of love, a time of hate, a time of war, and a time of peace, a time you may embrace, a time to refrain from embracing, a time to gain, a time to lose, a time to a time to rend, a time to sow, a time for love, a time for hate, a time for peace. I swear it's not too late. These words resonate with all of us. They touch us. They remind us of the circle of life that includes death. They remind us that what we may gain, we may also lose. And loss brings with it the inevitable grief. I like to think about grief, though, as a gift. Grief is a gift that allows us to heal after a loss. And grief can bring us to the depths of despair and back to a hopeful life. Grief is a very normal reaction to loss. Well, we know that loss comes in many forms. And as Kelly said, sometimes we don't even know that that's what's happening to us. But death, of course, is one of the major losses that happens in our lives, death of a loved one. But there are other losses as well. Divorce is a very big loss. In fact, for some, divorce is more difficult to walk through than death because it is the source of the person is still around. And so it's hard to resolve that sometimes. But transitions are also losses, the unwanted ones, the unexpected ones, as well as the desired ones. Losing a job, we know there's loss, but getting a new job, it also has certain kinds of losses because we have to give up things in order to get something new. Marriage, getting married can be having a baby. Kelly, I hear you've got a little baby. So there are joys and gains, but there's also loss for you and for anyone who has a child. Moving is another big loss. So you might want to spend some time thinking in your own life about losses that you really hadn't thought were losses before, because that may be impacting you in a way that you weren't aware of. And for older adults, there are additional challenges. Many of our older adults have lost due to physical conditions or disabilities. Moving, many older adults have to move to be closer to relatives who can help care for them, moving in with relatives or moving away from home into a facility. All of these are huge losses for our older adults. And another thing that we need to think about is the loss that they have due to the support systems that over time go away, especially if they have to move and they're not around their church family or their neighbors. Those are additional losses for our older adults. One of the things that we can't forget about, and we don't seem to be able to forget about it on the news either, is the impact of COVID. COVID has been this huge period of unresolved loss for folks. And when we don't resolve our loss, we end up having to deal with it at a later time. And it comes out in strange ways sometimes. You know, we are parents of an adopted daughter, and she had lots of losses because she came to be with us when she was 6. And I remember one day when we came home and found a dead mouse on our porch. And I unceremoniously picked it up and flipped it into the bushes. Well, she just totally broke down. It wasn't because of the mouse, but because of what that mouse, the loss that it represented to her. You know, she couldn't have verbalized it. She couldn't have understood it, but it was a trigger for her for the bigger losses in her life. But with COVID, we lost our ability to do ritual. We have, you know, whether it's a religious ritual or just a secular ritual or a ritual in your family, those things couldn't happen during COVID. And when my sister was dying of leukemia in New York right after COVID hit, I couldn't go see her. I couldn't be with her. I couldn't hold her hand. I couldn't hug her. And so we did the best we could, you know, with our own losses that way. Her friends went to the Central Park and was right by her window, and they let balloons go so she could see all the people that loved her during that time. And they sang for her because she was in a choir, and they sang for her, and they down below, and they had the phone by her ear. So we've done what we could to take the place of what we used to be able to do. It's been so hard to not be able to do funerals or memorial services as a pastor for those. I remember I did one at the nursing home. It was kind of abbreviated. I had 15 minutes to be with these people outside to do the service for this family. And it was so hard, you know, when they're saying, well, your time's up. Our grief time never is up in that way. It can't be. But the COVID has been a magnitude. There's been a magnitude of loss for us as a world because of COVID, and the number of people who have died, and the loss that is there and has not been well resolved for people. Well, we know that the grief process is never exactly the same. Grieving is different for each person and different for each loss that we have, that we experience. Today, we're going to talk about good grief, and good grief might seem like a bit of a contradiction in terms, but the reality is that there are certain things that can help us grieve well. Good grief helps us to reinvest in the circle of life. Good grief helps us to move from that mourning to the dancing, from weeping to laughing. And good grief allows our hearts to love once again. So how do we have this good grief? It's important for us to understand the stages of grief and the tasks of grief. So I'm going to try to put up on the board this. You have everybody got this in the email, right? So you also have copies of all of these at home, but I'm going to put it on the screen here if I can. Okay, let me see. I got to go down the bottom.
And that email went out just almost right before 2. So so you guys, everyone should have it, but just know it just went out.
Okay, can you see it now? I've got it on my screen as shared.
We can.
Okay, good. All right, well, let's look at this. Many of you may have heard of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She did a lot of the early work about grief, but most of her work was done with people who were dying. And so although that was good work, it doesn't necessarily help us to conceptualize it completely in when we're looking at we're helping people who have lost loved ones in terms of the stage of bereavement. So what I've done here is taken some things from a lot of different people and kind of put them into my own chart that helps us in a way that can help us not only look at the stages, but more the characteristics and how we can help. So if we take the chart and we look at the stages, I've got it lined up in terms of shock, disorganization, and reorganization. The initial characteristics of shock are, that's when you first find out about a death or a loss. And that's, usually there's a stage of initial disbelief. We become numb. At that point, we may have physical symptoms like we can't eat, we can't sleep, our stomachs hurt, we may have headaches. Our bodies reacting to this loss that we're finding out about. And if we go down the chart under shock, how long does this usually last? Well, it could be a few days or it could be a few months. One of the things we know about grief is there's no timelines. And if we don't, resolve grief at a particular time, it may come out later. One of the things that we know too, I don't want to forget to say, is that families tend to grieve at different levels because somebody needs to be in charge or in control often. And so one person will grieve more intensely early on, and the other ones may be stoic and they'll grieve more intensely later on in terms of dealing with their emotions, because it's kind of like they have to take turns. So you might see that in families. In shock, what people need is just kind of to hold it all together. They're trying to protect themselves in those early days. They're trying to accept the reality of the loss. And that's even when we know someone's dying, because even though we have it in a way in our head that somebody has died, there's a part of us that doesn't quite believe it yet. We don't really accept that. We sometimes even forget that they're gone, and sometimes it's kind of like, I want to call my mom, and then we realize that mom has already passed. So what folks need and what you can do to help if you're with someone who's in this stage of grief is to just be a supportive presence. They just need you there. Being there is one of the greatest ways that you can help. And the other thing is the assistance with practical matters. And I thought maybe you, I don't know, can you guys see the chat and me at the same time? Can you, Sarah?
Yeah, if we click on chat at the bottom, we can still see both you, chat, and your screen. So that's
okay, good. Well, go ahead and click on that, and if somebody want to kind of write in there, why am I not seeing the chat? Because I can't. Okay. Oh, here it is. I got it. All right. So throw out some of the ideas of the way that people can be helpful with practical matters after a death. Just kind of somebody throw something out in there in the chat. What ways do you do that? Just listen. All right, good. Just be there to listen. What kind of practical things can you do to help? Taking care of the pets, babysit kids, volunteer to grocery shop. Absolutely. Food. Yes. Yes. Bringing food. Think about those. I mean, we don't need to keep on this now, but think about those other ways as you anticipate other deaths in the future. What ways can you be helpful to other people in that initial stage of grief? All right, let's look at the next disorganization stage. This is where things you just can't get a handle on things emotionally, and your emotions are up and down, and you think you're doing better, and then you go down again, and it's kind of like a roller coaster of emotions in this disorganization stage. So let's throw back in the chat again what kind of emotions you might be feeling if you are grieving. Let me see, where is my, there we go, chat. Anger, anger, 2 people said anger. All right, what else? Confusion. Overwhelmed, lonely, sad, loss, more sadness, loneliness, depressed. What about something like relief? Is that part of grief? For some people, relief can be part of grief for people. What about joy? Is there some joy for folks? And why, how would they find that joy? They're not in pain, absolutely. Absolutely. They're not in pain. For those who believe in an afterlife, often the joy comes with knowing that that person isn't in pain and they are in heaven. So what we know about grief is that any variety of emotions can be here. Any intensity of emotions can be here. So it's important to allow yourself, we'll get to that in a few minutes, but allow yourself to feel those emotions. So this disorganization stage can last for many months, you know, where you're just kind of up and down and raw. What people need from you at that time is to just, they need to, that what people need to do at that time is to experience and express the pain of that loss. And that might happen in all different kinds of ways. What kind of ways besides talking, because we talked about listening, and so people need to talk. What other ways might people express their grief and loss? You can just put that in the chat. What other ways? Sharing photos, yeah. I have a friend who dances. She works through her feet, writing, crying, yeah, getting involved with the community. But yeah, for people who, and in our society, it's more often males who do it, sometimes getting out there and exercising or doing something, chopping down trees. Those are ways that they can do that as well. All right, and the role of the helper in this situation is to be that comforting, stabilizing presence. You know, often in this stage, people kind of disappear. Everybody comes around when the grief first happens, right about the time with, you know, when the loss occurs. And then about a month in, people have moved on. The person who's grieving hasn't. And that is, that's a hard time for folks, around a month. So if you're paying attention to people who are grieving, you might want to give them a call around a month's period of time. I got a note here that I have several clients that say they come to the center, that coming to the center really helped them after a loss, being with other people, going out and perhaps being with others that have experienced something different. So yeah, you're going to try to encourage them to speak or do something like go to the center to express their feelings. So we're going to look at the final column there, which is a reorganization. And that is, we're looking at how to adjust to the life as it currently exists. Now, for somebody who's lost a spouse, that's a huge adjustment. In terms of even the specifics that's happening in life, as well as the emotional piece. And that can take a while, months to years to really make an adjustment. But at that time, they're really needing to reinvest in life in some way, to reaffirm or develop a new identity. If it was a spouse that died, an identity as a single person. You know, if it's, you know, you lost a parent, you know, the feeling about what's my identity now that I have no parents left. You know, I'm an orphan. What does that look like for me? And how do I move ahead? So what's needed there in terms of folks that need to come alongside them is they need you to be available to them. They need supportive encouragement for those that might go to the center. They may need a call and have somebody invite them to come along. Hey, we got an event at the center today. Would you like to come with me? So to try to encourage people to get involved and along the way. Any questions about that? Oh, this is good. I have a friend who started traveling after a long illness of her partner. We cared for her home and pets. She worked on her bucket list. Oh, how exciting. Very good. Very good. All right, well, let's move on to the next. Let me see, I have to stop sharing. So I'm going to get to another screen. Here's the grief tasks. There are things that we need to work through as we work through our grief. Wait a minute, I haven't gotten you on there yet. There, screen share. Okay, there we go. You can all see that now. What we know about loss is that it's important for us to accept the reality of the loss, and that's our first task. The primary losses sometimes are easier for us than the secondary losses because sometimes we don't even recognize our secondary losses. Do we have, what kinds of things would be secondary losses? You want to throw in your chat what those might be? What do you think those are? It's something like your father dies before you get married and your secondary loss is not having him there to walk you down the aisle. Let's see what else other people have. Yeah. The places you used to go together, yes. Sometimes if you were a couple and you went square dancing, you don't have a partner anymore and you can't go square dancing anymore. So think about those other kinds of secondary losses. It may be if your spouse died, you have to move because you can't afford to live where you're living. You may have to cut your budget because you can't afford certain things anymore. Not get grandchildren, it says in the chat. Questions you used to ask, home repairs or recipes. Talk to a loved one at a given time each week and now they're gone. What do you do? How do you feel at that time? Yes, absolutely. Well, our second task in grief is to experience the emotion of the loss, to feel the emotions, to express the emotions. There's really no way under it, over it, or around it. We have to go through grief. If we don't, it will come back at a later date and time for us. Number 3, to allow the inner changes to occur to match the external reality of our loss. We have to realign ourselves. What is it like to be without a parent? What is it like to be without a child? What is it like to be without a spouse? What does that mean for me? And then number 3, still on number 3, we have a tendency to idealize people after they're gone. And so suddenly our spouse becomes this person that was greater than life and had never got angry, never had a problem. And suddenly they're, so big in our minds. And so we have to move beyond that idealization process and begin to get more realistic about life. Number 4, it's important to adjust to the world as it is now and begin to think about what problem solving and decision making needs to be made. For some of us, it may require new skills. If our spouse was the one who always did the checkbook and we never did, we have to learn to do our checkbook. If our spouse was the one that cooked the meals, we have to figure out how we're going to get our meals each day. Number 5, reestablish our identity and reorganize to reaffirm life. we get to make some choices at this stage of grief. We get to choose what to change and affirm what we want to continue. Loss gives us an opportunity to have different choices in life. And this is a particular time. This usually happens later in the grief process. And some of the things that you can encourage some of your folks you're working with to look at. So just a quick note, normal grief always has its ups and downs, and there are certainly days of special significance that may be difficult. Days like birthdays and holidays that are going to be tougher for you. Maybe Mother's Day if you lost your mother, or Father's Day if you lost your father. And certain kinds of events may trigger a renewed grief response, like the mouse example I was sharing with you earlier with my daughter. You've had several other mental health professionals. I do want to note this too, that any kind of severe or prolonged reactions may be indicative of complicated grief. And folks that are just really struggling may need to have some professional help working through their grief. If it's impacting their ability to cope with daily living, they continue to have problems sleeping and eating, they're not taking care of themselves, they're losing weight, more physical symptoms come out. And so, at some point, you may want to help these folks find someone who can walk through their grief professionally with them. And please, as a pastor, I have been there for many folks as they walk through this grief journey. Don't hesitate to encourage your folks to talk to their pastors. Questions on all of this? We went through this fairly quickly. Okay. Well, let's go to this one.
Question, but I do just have one comment to make as you're
Please
doing that. Just kind of thinking about the people that we serve, and I think it's always interesting to me that sometimes maybe we don't take it as serious, when someone who is older dies, but it's the fact that because it's an expected loss, but it's still really significant, I don't know. That was just something that I was thinking about as you were talking, because people will be like, oh, well, they were 80, they had a long life, but that's some big shoes to fill, they've been around for 80 years and all of a sudden they're not, like you said, who's going to be the one to do the taxes and pay the bills, it's really significant. So even if they are, older.
Yeah, as younger people view some of this differently than older people. I know that I did not experience any real grief early in life. I had a grandparent die, but I didn't know them really. They lived out of the country. And my first significant loss was grieving with a college roommate because she had a loss. And so my grief happened that way. I had never been to a funeral until, I don't know, I think I got out of college before I had been. And so if you haven't learned in your family to grieve because there weren't any particular losses, you coming in as a worker may be very different and not understanding death in the same way somebody who is 95 understands death. As we get older, and I'm one of those as we get older folks, you think about different things. And well, how many more years do I have? And what kinds of things can I still do? And, is this the last time that I get to see my grandkids? And is there another year that I might not be here? And so COVID was particularly hard on older adults who didn't get to see their folks. And so there was huge loss at that time. And then, you know, I mean, you see the pictures of people putting their little hands on nursing home windows to say hi to their grandparents. How sad, and how important for us to acknowledge that loss, and be able to not be afraid of it. I think sometimes we're afraid, we don't know what to say. I think they did a study at one point and interviewing people in the mall, and the study was, the question was, well, how long, you know, should it take you to grieve? And you know what the answer was? People, in the average person in the mall thought, well, maybe 3 weeks they should get back to normal. 3 weeks. Well, those of us that work with older adults know that that's not true. Those of you who've had significant losses know that that's not true. But sometimes, even if we know it's not true, we behave like it's true because it's hard for us. Somebody, you know, loses somebody in your office and they lose their mother, and you've had a recent loss, you know, talking about that to them may or may not, I mean, that may be really hard. You may not be able to be that support to them because you're still grieving that loss. And so I think that as caregivers of, you know, and people who work with older adults, there's issues, but also for you as workers together, you know, how can you be sensitive to that? How can you remember, how can you remember to we'll get into this some more, but how can you remember to take care of yourselves in the midst of this, and realize that, you know, even, you know, an older adult who is a widow or widower, that loss is still very real to that person. And you're thinking, oh, well, they died 30 years ago, they must be over it. Well, maybe not so much. So thank you, Kelly, for bringing that up. It's an important time to take a moment and highlight that.
Thank you. I don't want to off track, but Denise made such a good point in the comments that I don't want to miss it. She is talking about grieving when someone is still alive, but maybe they have dementia or they've lost, you know, some capacity. And so you grieve that also, even if the person's still there.
It's what we call anticipatory grief. And it's all of these feelings and things that we experience after a loss happens before, and particularly with someone with dementia, or someone we cannot be in contact with. There's a huge loss at that time. And we do go through all of these feelings and emotions. And it's important for us to work through those. But yeah, dementia is hard. I preached this week about memory. You know, does God ever forget? And talked about the fact that as we get older, one of the things that we worry about the most is, you know, am I going to forget? Am I going to lose my memory? Am I going to be able to remember my spouse? And also, are people going to forget me? You know, and what does that mean? You know, are they going to forget to call me? Are they going to, you know? And many of our older adults are not totally forgotten, but don't get that contact that they need. There's another comment here my mother passed away last year in the nursing home during COVID. My siblings and I are still grieving. We missed precious time with her, and our grieving process may last a lot longer due to that. Absolutely, Darlene. I'm sorry to hear about your mother. Absolutely. And then I think with dementia, you actually lose the person twice, first in memory and then in body. Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, let's look at this next chart, and let me see if I can put it up for you. It talks about how we can care for others. I thought I'd put it in a little chart, A, B, C, D, E's, to help us kind of walk through some of these things. And these are not, whoops, something just happened. I got to the wrong chart. How did I mess that up?
Sharon, we see A, B, C, D, E.
Oh, good. Good. I didn't. I was back on my other chart. Okay, I'm back to the ABCDs. Good. E's. Somebody mentioned early on, what can we do to help? And somebody said, listen. A couple of people said, listen. Absolutely. That's if you can do nothing else, please listen. And also remember that everyone grieves differently. And sometimes what happens is even grief doesn't, people don't look like they're grieving. And so we think, well, so-and-so needs to grieve more. Well, sometimes that's their way of grieving. And so don't be judgmental because they're not crying at the funeral. Don't, make assumptions about how they're feeling or not feeling, because you don't really know. So give grace to everyone in how they are grieving, and allow them to grieve in their own way. So first of all is our A's. Acknowledge their loss. Putting words to that is important. We know how to do that pretty well when we first, a loss first occurs. You say, I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry to hear about so-and-so. And we seem to know how to do that at first. But at other times, what people sometimes tell me when I've done work with people that are grieving is nobody will talk about him anymore. He was my spouse for 50 years and no one will say his name. So remember to say his name. And allow them to share their grief, because sometimes they don't feel like they have permission to talk about it with you because they're afraid they're going to upset the grandkids, or they're afraid they don't want to upset you as a caregiver. But give them that opportunity to share. Assist with practical matters. That may be, early on picking people up at the airport who came in for the funeral. It may be the food we talked about. Sometimes there's just things that need to get done that the person who's grieving just can't do. I like the B's. Be there, be attentive, be involved, be supportive, be patient. This is a long process for folks, and they just need you there, particularly those of you who are working in the home. If you have somebody who's working through grief, they need you, they need you a lot. And so your very presence is special for them. We could write a whole page of cares if we wanted to. Care is so important. You can put on your papers, if you like writing things, just make it in big letters, care. If you take nothing else away, care. And I know that the work you do is a calling for you. And so I know that you are people who care. Another C is to connect them with resources. There may be resources in the community that they need, whether that's, has to do with helping them with physical issues or grieving issues or emotional issues or spiritual issues. They may need you to be the person that can help connect them. I decided to put in a few don'ts. Don't judge. It's easy sometimes for us to look back and think, well, I would do it this way, or how could she be like that? But don't do that. Don't minimize. It may have been 30 years since they lost their spouse, but I have a woman in my church who didn't even want me to visit on the day her husband died 30 years ago because she just couldn't bring herself together to greet me that day. Don't impose your own beliefs on someone else. That can be tricky because all of us have our own beliefs about death and loss and who might go to heaven and who might not, and why somebody might have died or why they didn't. Be careful about that. Be caring, but careful about other people's beliefs. Also, don't move faster than the bereaved. They're going slowly. Don't send them off to the activities and the in the center until they're ready for that. They might be ready early. I remember after my father died, I went to choir practice that first week because I just needed to be there. I stood up in the back, but I was at choir practice. So, you know, help them move at their own pace. And don't begin to share your stories, at least initially. They don't need to hear about how your spouse died or what happened to your mother who had leukemia, or, you know, your stories. Not initially. Later, it would be okay to share, but initially they need to be focused on their own stories, because as soon as you start talking about yourself, they change. Their emotion changes, their ability to stay in their feelings changes, because, oh, I can think about your loss instead of my own loss. I can't see questions or anything. Is there anything in the box now? Let me see. Chat.
You're good.
We're good right now. Okay, good. All right. Our ease are, how do we encourage them? We need to encourage them to talk about their loved ones, to tell their stories. You know, I love to just, you know, if somebody's lost their spouse, well, tell me about how you met. What was that like? You know, what was he like when he was 20 and you met him? To get them to just talk about that person. And then encourage them to surround themselves with supportive people. Sometimes we have people in our lives that we allow to be in our lives who are not supportive to us. And so, you know, sometimes it's okay to encourage people to say, hey, you're just not ready to be with Uncle Joe right now. He's just too much of a downer. So encourage them to be around people that are really supportive of them in their journey. Encourage them to participate in religious or other rituals. You know, most faith traditions have particular rituals that are involved, often have, you know, sometimes an All Saints Day, or do memorial activities, sometimes on Memorial Day. Encourage them, if that's part of their tradition, to do that. For some, rituals like going to the cemetery is good. Whatever fits for them. Encourage them to nourish themselves physically and spiritually. We know that exercise helps. We know that for those who are religious, prayer helps. I love to just take the hymn book and sing hymns out loud. You know, others like to read the hymns in the scriptures. The Psalms are our hymns. So whatever works for you. Also encourage them to simplify. Sometimes they feel like they have to carry the whole thing that they've always done. And it's okay sometimes to give up some things. So simplify how they cook meals, you know, how they do their daily routines. All of that may be very helpful for folks. And then as we move through the grief process, that's when you begin to encourage them to cultivate a realistic outlook of what's happened. You know, and depending on your role, you know, that may be around different kinds of things. You want them to encourage them to reinvest in life. And I like this last one, to encourage them to give themselves permission to enjoy life again. Often, particularly widows and widowers, don't feel like they should enjoy life anymore. They kind of feel like how could they enjoy life because their spouse is no longer there? I worked with a woman in hospice who, it was Thanksgiving time, and somebody had invited her to Thanksgiving dinner, and she went to dinner and she had a great time. And then she went home and felt guilty. And she was all upset that she had fun when her spouse was no longer there. Her husband wasn't with her. And later a friend said to her, you know, what would Joe have wanted for you for today? And when she could know that Joe would have wanted her to enjoy her Thanksgiving, she was able to really live into that moment. And just a few additional things here about concerns for older adults. We know that they may be dealing with multiple losses simultaneously. So that, you know, don't discount that when you think about the grief they're going through. You know, the grief about one thing may be stronger than what you think the grief would be about. So make sure you take that into consideration. They may have a reduced support system often, and especially if it's, you know, someone close to them's died who's been part of that, and they may have difficulty accessing resources. So some things to think about as you work with folks. What kind of questions do you have? This is like a basic how-to if someone's grieving. So what questions do you have? Nothing there specifically? I covered it in all the A, B, C, D, and E's. We got almost the whole alphabet. There we go. Okay, well, let's move to my last handout. Let me see if I can get this up. I gotta get out of stop share first. And then I gotta get into this. Okay. Yep, okay, then it's gotta go. There's several steps to making this work, and you gotta get everything. There we go. Let's see if this works. Okay, and you see caring for yourselves through grief? Okay.
We can.
Good, good. I admire every one of you for the work that you do, especially as you're working with seniors. And I think it's important for us to pause every time that we lose one of our clients, because grieving the loss of a client is often a challenging thing. Paid caregivers and volunteers are often expected to go from that stage we talked about of shock when they first hear about a loss to the stage of reorganization instantly. Suddenly they hear about a loss of somebody they've been caring for a year, and then they're assigned to go see a new, you know, be with a new client the next day or the very same day. I don't know how all that works in your system, but suddenly they haven't really had a chance to grieve, and they have to get it together enough to go to work, to be there for that next person. So I think that it's important for each of you that loses a client to remember that you need to take time to grieve personally for that person. And all those stages and tasks that we've gone through apply to you as well. And so as a group, you may, and I know you're several groups among a bigger group, but think about how you can develop some rituals for yourself and for others. One thing may be to send cards. When I worked at hospice, everyone signed a card that went to the loved one of the person who had died. Hospice was able to allow various people to go to the memorial services at different times. So you would see nurses there, or a social worker or a chaplain who might be able to go that day. That might not work out for you if you're assigned to something else. So think about other things. Think about maybe lighting a candle. If you're allowed to, you might keep a book of names and pictures. What other ideas do you have? You're the ones that are working in the areas that you are. What could you do that would help your process of grieving with each other? I gotta get back to the chat. Okay. What do you think would be helpful for you? Plant a memorial plant or tree, absolutely. Good idea. Volunteer. All right, good. Read or keep obituaries, do things they enjoyed. All right. I always give a Bible to the Gideons in memory. Yes, absolutely. I always welcome plants if the family has an abundance. Sometimes there are so many. Yeah. Plants is so nice because it's a living thing, especially if you give a living plant to somebody else at the funeral time. There's always cut plants, but the ones that often are very meaningful families are when they come as a living plant. But you might do that. You might figure out, if you have an office where you all gather, hey, this, you do a little plant of flowers. Well, I'm not going to stay here because we're just about out of time, but I wanted you to, yes, my uncle died 20 years ago and my grandma still has a Kenny plant. Oh, how special. Thank you, Kelly. Consider in your groups establishing your own support network, and don't be afraid to ask for help. And whatever ways you can do that within your organizations, please do that. You are not human. You are human beings. You're not human doings. And being human beings is what makes you good at what you guys do. And I appreciate that so much. I want you each to remember that you make a difference. You made a difference in that person's life who passed, and you make a difference in lives of people every single day. So I want to just give you all a big thank you for being you. So I have we can do a couple of quick questions and then I have a final poem to end with. Is any other questions that you have? Okay, well, let me share this poem. It's by Matt Schmidt. You can't have it without the sun. You can't have it without the rain, or the sunshine and the rain, the laughter and the pain. Together, they make rainbows. So thank you very much. I appreciated my time with you together today.
Oh, Sharon, thank you so much. Oh, this was so heavy but uplifting at the same time. I'm not sure how, but yeah, so thank you both. It's an important topic, professionally and personally, for all of us, and remembering we are human. So you guys, we're going to do door prizes, so give us just a minute. Don't leave in case you're the winner. But yeah, so thank you. And I just want to invite everyone to our last session next week. We will be wrapping up with Chris Gadzik, talking about tools for our journey. So let's go ahead and do our door prize. But thank you so much, Sharon. You were wonderful.
Oh, thank you. One other thought is that I'm going to be doing two. Did I already say this about the Hope for the Holidays to the whole group? No, not yet.
You did not.
Did not. I'm going to be doing two Hope for the Holidays workshops in November. And so we'll get that information out to you. Those workshops are designed specifically for those who are in the grieving process themselves. So we'll let you know about that. And also a resource with hospice. They are doing monthly grief support groups. I'm not involved with those, but the hospice staff are. So if you have someone who might be, that'd be a resource for all of you. So I'm going to let you all get to your door prizes and say goodbye. But thank you so much. I really enjoyed my time with you.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like Sharon said, we will be sending out sort of a resource list of all kinds of things we've talked about during this conference at the end. So for our door prize today, I picked number 8. And the 8th person on my screen was Millie Smith. So she is our door prize winner today. Congrats, Millie. And Anna will tell us what you've won.
Congratulations, Millie. So you have your own Embracing Aging Superpower shirt. I'm not sure where the camera's going. There we go.
Yep.
And your own owl. Oh gosh, your own owl. Your own bag. I'm talking about the owl because that's who the camera is, what we named the camera. Okay, so here's your bag. Then you have an acrylic super chiller salad bowl. This is a kitchen set. And this is the prepping solutions, your own ultimate measuring set. So congratulations, Millie, and I'll hand it back to Sarah.
Mhm.
Thanks, Hannah. That's awesome. Millie, if you will get in touch with us, we will get you the correct t-shirt size as well as the rest of your goodies that you won today. If you'll email or give us a call here at the commission, we'll be glad to facilitate that. Thank you all so much for being with us today. Again, it was a topic that is much needed and not always something that we want to listen to or talk about, but certainly need to. And I don't know about you, but I learned a couple of things today, and I will take that forward. Again, we look forward to seeing you next week as we wrap up our 2022 spring conference. Thanks for being with us. See you next week.